Do I have undiagnosed C-PTSD from narcissistic abuse? I believe at some point during healing all survivors of narcissistic abuse ask this question, if they have not been diagnosed already. We need an explanation for the dreams, nervousness, unnatural amounts of anxiety, depressiveness, and other disorders we now experience. PTSD is no longer singled out for war veterans, and is now inclusive of all trauma victims, termed complex PTSD, known as C-PTSD. Since the awareness of narcissistic abuse is minimal in mainstream society, it makes being diagnosed with C-PTSD much harder. Most victims experience a lot of physical illnesses, which disappear when they remove the narcissist, so we cannot help but to conclude that the relationship is the cause. When we look at the symptoms of C-PTSD, I can say confidently that most of us that have experienced narcissistic abuse are suffering from C-PTSD. This C-PTSD mostly occurs when you have left the narcissist, but can also occur during the relationship, because of unresolved trauma with the previous narcissist. Feeling stuck and confused is a common feeling. There's an unexplained emptiness after experiencing narcissistic abuse. They have spent so much time removing your personality and depleting your soul to make you as empty as they are. Finding yourself after this experience is a long road, and the truth is you will never be the same again. Pain changes us, and for the good if we learn from it. Nightmares and flashbacks is very common at some stage during healing. It is hard to explain the dreams you have about the narcissist that violated your life, especially when you have stopped thinking of this person. In my opinion, these dreams are our bodies vomiting and detoxing after the abuse. It is all a part of the healing process. The emotional flashbacks truly take my breath away, and can come out of nowhere, or triggered by smells and illustrations. I have always loved collecting photographs since I was very young, reporting my life in a very periodical way. I have always enjoyed this. I have tons of photo albums. After I left my 10-year relationship, I still struggle 6 years later to create photo albums. The backlog of photos give me such extreme emotional flashbacks. I get dizzy, cry, and feel very unstabilized. My last attempt was over 2 years ago before I learned of narcissism, so perhaps I will try again in time. There are certain genres of music I could not listen to for years. I would want to vomit, and would get emotional flashbacks of when he cheated on me, and did other very distasteful things. Dissociation is part of my C-PTSD, and probably my most long-term symptom. I have kept a diary since I was 12 years old, until I was 24 years old. I had over 100 diaries that got more sophisticated in both my writing and the quality of books I brought to write in. I took time to place photos in my diaries, and anyone who knew me then knew that I had been journaling most of my life. One day I came home, and all 100+ journals were destroyed and torn to pieces on the floor at the front door as I entered my home. It was a very numbing experience. I put them all in the bin as the father of my children, threw the first diary I had ever wrote in 1993, in my face and said, "You can have that one, that was the only time you were innocent." I told no one, and avoided conversation about my diaries with family and friends for years. In 2019, 10 years later, when I told this story when applying for a restraining order against him, I broke down crying, and I just could not stop crying. I had completely dissociated from this event that happened to me. During healing and recovery, I learned that when I am in the company of others, I naturally dissociate from my actual self, which leaves me very open to passive aggression and is a result of C-PTSD. I have been suffering with depression since 2016, and also when I believe my C-PTSD began. My depression came out of nowhere. I was doing great in business, and looking in from the outside, life would have appeared great. I was 2 years out of my 10-year abusive relationship, and the world should have been my oyster. But I felt nothing but hopelessness, worthlessness, and overwhelmed with feelings of emptiness. Although I had escaped my narcissistic partner, I was unaware of the large amounts of toxic people I had in my life. I did therapy for 1 year in 2016, no inclination of narcissistic abuse was mentioned, and I personally had never heard of it at the time. The therapist believed it all came down to me having no boundaries in my life, and so we worked on that. It did help slightly, but was only part of the problem. The therapist was determined for me to make progress, with setting boundaries with my mother. After 1 year of therapy she said these exact words, "I am so sorry, I cannot help you with your mother. For whatever reason your mother is incapable of accepting boundaries from you. I would learn why, a couple years later." Another strong effect of C-PTSD is high levels of hyperarousal, which includes anxiety, nervousness, feeling jumpy, obsessive thinking, racing thoughts, feeling scared, agitated, stressed, overwhelmed, emotional, etc. There is a difficulty in controlling your emotions, and you may spend a lot of time imagining worst-case scenarios and conversation with the narcissist, explaining yourself as part of the aftermath. Over time, feeling jumpy and nervous has really taken its toll on my mental health. I now have 2 teenage sons, who are loud in movement around the house, and now have deep voices. During my current recovery, I remember a week during lockdown, when I retreated to my bed, and I felt very numb. I had been learning many coping tools during therapy, and I knew this feeling of nothingness was no longer acceptable. My therapist had already made me understand this was how I handled situations because I had no choice back then. The grown woman I am now faces her problems with logic, and not emotion. Underneath my sheets I came to the realization that whenever my boys became loud, I was seriously triggered, my heart would beat so fast, and my anxiety would be through the roof. In this state of panic I remembered, all through my years at home with my mother, she used loud sounds to control me emotionally. She constantly cursed me around the house, slammed cupboards and doors. This continued when I no longer lived with her, and had children in my own home. Before going no contact with my mother in 2018 at age 36, I would be nervous at home waiting for her humiliating, loud, and verbally abusive visits, insulting me in front of my children, and banging my furniture. No amount of asking her to stop would make her stop, and her narcissistic rages have worsened over time. When I retaliated I felt like the bully, because she said I was the bully whenever I defended myself. I was made to feel guilty, and ashamed for talking to my mother rudely. I am still not over this hurdle. I still get very unnerved by loud bangs, and people shouting, especially angry people. I keep my phone on silent for the majority of the day, as it suddenly ringing creates a reaction in me. My undiagnosed C-PTSD started when I was away from an abuser for an extended amount of time. After having peace in my home for a very long time, I was visited by the father of my children in 2019, and I got a restraining order after this incident. He burst through my front door cursing, and shouting, threatening, and insulting me. Nothing he hadn't done before. I was shaking like a leaf when he left. I was unnerved for many days. His very passive-aggressive mother, who I went no contact with in early 2020, turned up uninvited at my home in December 2020. She gaslighted me on my doorstep, and I stood up for myself, but again I was shaking like a leaf when she left. The next day my whole body broke out into hives. I am thankful to have escaped these toxic relationships, but I am saddened by the effects it has had on my nervous system. I do believe it is these past experiences that trigger these reactions in me, and this, with many other symptoms, confirms to me my undiagnosed C-PTSD. Guilt and shame are not symptoms I would have considered to be part of the list for C-PTSD. All people who have been victimized by narcissists know the feeling of guilt and shame they bring out of you. Those of us who suffered a narcissistic parent will know guilt and shame as a way of life, until you're made self-aware of emotional abuse, and given the opportunity to heal. We exhibit extreme shame and guilt in a relationship with a narcissist, during a breakup, and going low, or no contact. We spend time anxious about what impression we have relayed to our abuser, even though they would never give us such consideration. We suffocate under guilt and shame. It is so detrimental to our self-esteem. It is no wonder that feelings of guilt and shame are listed as a symptom for C-PTSD. Guilt and shame comes with a constant feeling of unreasonable obligation to others, and carrying a sense of toxic shame that you are different to others, that can result in isolation. Another is feeling very childlike, and not being able to step out of this feeling. I really struggled with this in 2018 and 19, I literally felt like a child mentally, and I couldn't shake the feeling for nearly 2 years. I returned to my childhood activities for 2 summers. It was a very toxic environment for me, but looking back I was self-sabotaging because of the extensive pain I was going through, and I felt like a child and acted like a child, sometimes in my mannerisms. Looking back now, it was probably C-PTSD from going no contact with my mother, and how I used to feel very insecure without her guidance. Without knowledge, or a diagnosis, we remain unclear as to what is wrong with us. Since learning about narcissistic abuse, it has been easy enough to find the right materials to build knowledge and understanding of my conditions. Seeking out a therapist that deals with people recovering from narcissistic abuse has been a massive step in my healing journey. Fatigue and extreme tiredness has to be the most telling sign. Guilt and shame will make us think of ourselves as lazy, as opposed to the reality that your body is experiencing trauma-formed responses: fight, flight, or freeze. Fatigue and tiredness happens when you are in or out of the relationship with a narcissist. This symptom can also be long in duration, lasting for months, or even years. In recovery, to be kind and patient with ourselves is crucial. Some days you can function as normal, but there will be days when you simply cannot function, and it is during these times that being kind to yourself is crucial. The sad thing is, finances and life circumstances may not permit time for this type of healing, but where it is possible it should be done. How is the voice in your head speaking with you? Is it nice, understanding, and forgiving of your situation, or does it sound like your abuser? Be certain of what messages you are telling yourself on the days you experience fatigue. Unhealthy coping strategies include self-harm, eating issues, alcohol, drug, prescription meds abuse, etc. Recognizing your coping strategies as a result of your trauma is all key knowledge for recovery. The tactics used to overcome this should always be based around trauma symptoms, and your recovery from narcissistic abuse treated like drug addiction. It is the same chemical reaction in the brain when you are trauma bonded, as when you are addicted to Class A drugs. This is crucial to know during recovery, as it includes the same symptoms: weaning, relapse, and withdrawal from the narcissist. C-PTSD nearly always includes a physical manifestation of trauma and abuse. Example: headaches, tummy aches, chest pains, dizziness, tingling limbs, nausea, IBS, unexplained physical or somatic ailments. When the question, "What physical manifestation has resulted from narcissistic abuse?" is asked in support groups, tons of answers come forward. It goes without saying that emotional abuse shows up in our physical bodies. I am a survivor of 38 years of narcissistic abuse. It started with my grandmother and mother. My ignorance of the topic until 2 years ago permitted me to be a narcissist magnet. All my love relationships, friendships, and co-workers I personally selected are all narcissistic or very toxic people. In 2014, I separated from my very overt narcissistic partner of 10 years, whom I have 2 children with. At this point my covert narcissistic mother took over my household for the next 2 years. During this time the emotional abuse from my mother was excessive, and I developed a cyst in my breast. The doctors claimed it was from smoking. It grew so big I was put into hospital twice, and put on an antibiotic drip. The cyst kept returning, and caused me tremendous physical pain for years. I went no contact with my mother in 2018, and it immediately started to heal. I was seeing a new man from 2017, whilst unaware of narcissism, and unaware he was a narcissist. By 2020 the abuse went to new levels, and the cyst, which had stopped growing, returned with a lot of fluid inside. After a very abusive incident with him, I felt extremely suicidal, and the cyst grew so big that my breast became deformed. A week later it burst, and there was enough fluid to fill a teacup, and this wasn't the first time, but it was the first time since my mother. I decided the fluid was him, and the pain he caused me was in the cup, and I needed to keep him out of my body. It took me another 2 months to walk away from that relationship, and then another 3 months of resisting his hoovering, and learning how to truly implement my boundaries. When I removed him from my life, I also went no contact with the friends I considered narcissistic or toxic. I had been going no contact with many people prior to this, as both me and my children's father come from cluster narcissistic families. After no contact with over 15 people, the cyst on my breast completely healed. I still can't believe it now. After 5 years of it taking me through such agony, my skin now looks as if it had never been there before. Suicidal thoughts and fantasies are also signs of C-PTSD. During suicidal thoughts we do not know it at the time, but speaking to someone is crucial. It was during one of my most suicidal episodes that a friend phoned, whom I am not that close with. As I lay figuring out what I will use to hang myself, she was speaking into my soul, when speaking about uplifting herself. After being on the phone for around 90 minutes, my attitude had changed slightly, and when we finally came off the phone, I was grateful for the call. To this day she has no idea she saved my life. I got the following advice from Dr. Sarah Davies, who is a psychologist and EMR therapist. A common state many people living with C-PTSD find is a preference or desire to be self-reliant, and due to trust issues, as a result of traumatic relationship experiences, tend to want to address and work through their problems alone. It's understandable to feel that way, however she suggests, and speaking from her own experience, that finding a safe support group, or therapist who you feel you can work with, is in itself an important part of the healing. Trauma from narcissistic abuse, or any other kind of damaging toxic relationship, is a relational trauma, meaning the trauma has been about something between you and another person. The kind of betrayal caused from narcissistic abuse can create damaging issues of trust. However, through social engagement either via healthy support systems or a therapeutic relationship are an important part of recovery. The process of a good therapeutic relationship can support this healing. Dr. Sarah Davies says, C-PTSD is helped through specialist trauma therapy approaches. Specific trauma therapy approaches tend to be body-based or incorporate bottom-up processing, so it's important if you are seeking a therapist to try to find somebody who understands healing trauma in this way. This is because analysis, high-level thinking, analytical talking therapies may not reach the trauma in order to help process any past traumatic experiences. In fact, some therapy approaches can even be re-traumatizing. I agree with it all, and I have the following advice based on my experience so far. It is important to feel the emotions and the pain, and yes, they are going to hurt. Numbing these emotions is not how we overcome them. Every moment we spend sobbing, we are doing the work of healing, and every moment we are hurting. The only way to the other side, and to experience healing and recovery, is to go through this pain. Overcoming C-PTSD is a border we must cross, and although I personally am not there yet, I trust the process.